Here in maritime Canada, it has rained almost every day for each weekend for the last 4 weeks. So progress on the New Year's gardens has gone slowly. But a couple days ago we had a cloudy day that was at least free of rain. So we went back to work on the gardens. One of the many important steps we have to do is preparing the raspberry beds. Many years ago when we began our perennial raspberry beds, we had intended to make them much larger. But only a year after beginning them, I found a very large patch of wild raspberries growing in an ideal section of fertile ground deep in the woods near a wetland. The berries that wild patch produced were so large and sweet that we decided, why bother to cultivate them when we could harvest them from nature? Still, we have a little patch we started near the cottage, and it produces excellent berries, so why not keep it going? Thus, over the years we have, and every year it gets better and better. For whatever reason, Daphne loves tending the raspberries, and so that particular garden job tends to fall on her. She's become our raspberry expert. It is important to consider where you'll establish your raspberry patch. Raspberries are perennial, they need a lot of sun, and they are hardy. Once they are in the ground, they're pretty much there to stay, and they will attempt to spread aggressively, so they'll have to be controlled. For us, control is fairly simple, as the topsoil of our land is very shallow and the ground is very rocky. Where we garden, the ground is deep, rich loam, only because over many years we have added many tons of compost to that area. But even though the topsoil between areas where we've added compost might only be an inch or two thick, the raspberries still attempt to grow aggressively, most often trying to spread into our nearby strawberry patch. We'll take a look at that later. We guide the growth of domestic raspberry canes. We want them to grow pretty much straight up. This allows them to grow in a very space-effective manner, maximizing their yield per the space they occupy in the garden. Guiding their growth is a simple affair. We place several fence posts along the inside of each row where the raspberries will go, and attach electric fence wire to the posts. We run 3 courses of wire between the posts in order to weave the canes through the wire as they grow. To make the attachment, we use heavy gauge nails. We hammer them in till only an inch protrudes from each post, and then we attach a length of wire between each of the nails. We run a separate length of wire between each post. It is important that this wire remains taut, and running separate wire between each of the nails allows us to go back and tighten up the wire as need be. Occasionally, a wire may break, especially under the stress of the North's deep snows. When this happens, it's easy enough to rejoin the wire simply by bending a hook into each wire with a pair of pliers, hooking them back together, and then twisting the ends a bit to secure them. In the cold of the spring, when the raspberries are just coming out of dormancy, that's the time to begin preparing them for the new growing season. It's a fairly straightforward process of removing the old canes so that the new canes have room to grow. However, raspberries are biennial plants. This means that the canes that they grow this year will not produce fruit till next year, so it's important only to remove canes that have borne fruit the previous year. Daphne has been doing this for a long time and she has a quick eye, and a couple useful methods to tell which canes are old and have already borne their fruit versus which are new canes that will bear fruit this year or next year. But in the harsh winds and deep snows of the north, many of the older woody and brittle canes snap under the burden of winter. Those short ones, she quickly breaks away from the root crowns. When she encounters tall live canes, she weaves them to the inside of the wire caging that we will use to guide the canes as they grow. Not all the old dead canes will have broken, but by waiting until a few weeks into spring, we can catch the canes as they are just beginning to bud. Tall canes just budding will usually be those that will bear fruit. New canes will appear as tender green shoots, often only a few inches tall. So by removing all broken canes and all tall canes without any leaf buds on them, we can reliably get rid of what we don't want in the raspberry patch. Once the raspberry cane rows are prepared, it's time to move over to the nearby strawberry patch that I let lie fallow last year and dig out the rogue canes. Even though I dig out the topsoil between the raspberry canes and the strawberry patch every year, the raspberries still manage to work runners over toward the strawberry beds. Keeping them from utterly taking over the strawberry beds is a matter of aggressively pulling out any canes that we find. When I plow up the beds prior to planting new strawberries, that will break up the runners, and the runners will try to send up new canes all throughout the strawberry bed, so we'll have to go through and aggressively pull them out all through the summer. Fortunately, breaking up the runners stops them from receiving support from the raspberry canes that are already established over in the raspberry rows. And by pulling out the canes they try to send up, we can weaken those runners till they're no longer able to try to make new growth. Daphne is the raspberry girl, however, and she knows well how to manage them. She also has a sharp eye for spotting what's worth saving from those rogue canes. Strong, viable rogues will end up properly planted in the raspberry cane rows. I'll let Daphne explain what to look for.
The rogue plants that I've pulled. Here's a good candidate for replanting. It's got a new shoot for this year, last year's shoot that will produce this year, and this is the dead base that could have produced this year. Being an everbearing, it would produce its second crop in the spring or early in the season, but it got damaged over winter.
Once the raspberry cane rogues have been pulled and the best have been separated from the detritus, it's time to move them over back into the raspberry patch. Because raspberries are so hardy and require little additional care, this is a very easy procedure. Just dig a shallow hole and put them in. You don't really have to worry about mulching or any particular preparations, even in the extreme cold of northern climates.
So that new sprout for this year is just buried under the surface here, which is okay because the roots underneath need to get reaccustomed to this new spot, and that new growth will just shoot up through the dirt again.
Later, as we move into summer and the raspberries begin to grow more actively, we'll go into how to fertilize raspberries to get the best growth and the best fruiting.